So yeah, welcome again to another awesome chat. We've got Dan with us here, who's the CPO at 23andMe. But Dan, before we start, I've actually brought you a present. For those of you who don't know, I live in Dubai, and this here is a camel milk chocolate.
Thank you.
So it's a bit unusual. There's only one bar, so you guys are going to have to wait. So yeah, thank you for joining us, and it's great to have you. We're going to go through, talk about Dan's journey and things, because the topic of this is building impactful products. As he was introduced, he's worked for Google, where he's been working at Maps and Waymo. So let's kick off and just tell the audience really about your journey back then, of what you were doing at Google and Waymo and how you were involved in that, and then we'll move forward into 23andMe.
Sure. Well, thanks for having me. And I guess where I'd start is, soon after undergrad, I actually started in three different startups, more on the enterprise SaaS space. So I started as a software engineer, one working on kind of workforce management, enterprise SaaS, then worked to more developer tools, and then around international trade. So I went through three startups. I think after the third startup, I realized two things. One is, as much as I'd always loved being an engineer and software engineering, I really wanted to be more involved on the strategy side. And then secondly, as much I believed in the business models of enterprise SaaS, I was looking for ways to have even more impact in terms of developing more impactful products. And so I actually went back to grad school as part of that. So went and got an MBA and as well as a public policy degree, looking at what were some of the biggest challenges for society as well as ways to tackle them. And so I spent time, for instance, in Kenya, working for a nonprofit there, looking at ways that technology could help economic development. And when I came out, that's when I joined Google. And that first gig was really looking at Google Maps and how to take Google Maps and build an enterprise product and a developer platform for it. And so it was really working on the Maps API and taking that and making it something really useful and powerful for other developers to build amazing things on. So everything from real estate sites to exercise machines, those are all things that they're kind of built on top of it. From there, that's when I looked across Google and Alphabet and looked for other opportunities, and that's when I came across Waymo. And I was really intrigued by this opportunity where there's this amazing business model, there's this tremendous technology element to it, but then also this opportunity to save over 1.3 million lives every year that are lost to car crashes, and we're kind of just used to it. And so I was there for around 8 years as chief product officer, building that up in terms of both everything from like the ride-hailing app to how we develop the technology. But most recently, I was thinking about what would be my next chapter, what would be the ways that I could continue to contribute and make impact. And that's when I was really looking at health tech, right? It just felt like health tech is such an interesting phase today, where there's just a proliferation of different data sets. There's real, different, I think, interactions around talent pools, like across kind of more traditional tech and health tech. And so I was really intrigued by the opportunity to really contribute and there. And so I feel like 23andMe really drew me because even though it's like a 17-year-old startup, and the reality is there's so much opportunity left, right? Like that if people actually, like more people got their genetics tested, we could find health risks far earlier and actually achieve preventative health.
I mean, it's a big difference from roads to bones, if you like, and bodies. Who of you has used 23andMe? Have you got some customers in the audience? And we've got some potential selling to do.
Yes.
And so we were just talking backstage about building impactful products. And obviously Startup Grind is around entrepreneurs coming together. If you've got ideas, you're trying to meet new people. And we were talking about how building impactful products really help change people's lives. From obviously with Google Maps before you started, I use Google Maps all the time. I actually use Google Maps when I know where to get to. And that's really weird. It's become, I've got a little girl and she's like, why are we using Google Maps? You take me to school every day. But again, it's become a thing. And then Waymo with obviously the autonomous side of things. And like you say, the technology is helping prevent car accidents. And I think that we're seeing a lot more of that evolve now. And now you've moved over into 23andMe. So we were just talking backstage about when you are building a product, how do you kind of differentiate between different stages? You have like product, meaningful, impactful product, and then you have this, what we were discussing, this, I can't, what was the term you used? It was really cool, I forgot.
I don't remember, but yeah.
Wait, we got another screen. Basically, it was talking about how you've got impactful products, but then now really impactful products of things that, you know, you can take things from healthcare and stuff. So could you just unpack where you see this space going, and for entrepreneurs in the audience, what would be your advice to them if they're looking at getting into a space like 23andMe?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, I guess the way I think about it is like the people in this room, like all of you, bring such a tremendous skill set, right, experiences. And I think what I'm really passionate about is having more of us take those skills and focus on what I would call like truly impactful products, right? And so I think much of tech has already had such a tremendous impact, and there's developed so many different technologies, but some of them I think end up more around kind of adding convenience and being kind of really interesting next generation technologies. But I think if we could focus more of our efforts on things that actually made society a better place, kind of really tackled some of the core problems, really saved lives. So one of the ways when I was thinking about my own next chapter was, what are the areas where these are the core societal problems, right? Like these are the areas that if we don't tackle them in the next decade or two, that's going to make it even more challenging. And that's what partially led many to health, right? Like I do feel passionate that that's an area that bringing more technology to bear there hopefully can bring down the costs, increase accessibility, right, for folks, and really get to personalized and preventative care. But that's how I think about it, is really like thinking about products, almost having a higher bar as you're thinking about your startup, as you're thinking about joining a startup. Like, what is the type of company that's really going to be transformative, not just for your own kind of pocketbook or how, the next career phase, but really for society. I think that's, if we all had that, if we really leverage kind of that skill set that we have even in this room, I think it'd be tremendous for society.
Yeah, and I've always been really intrigued by like healthcare and like what Apple have, like the health app and the APIs. We've got now Apple Watches, it tracks how many steps we do, our sleeping patterns, and this kind of data set, if you like, is becoming a layer for people to build cool stuff on top of. And I'd just be interested to see if you were to look at examples of maybe things you've read about or startups you've seen of like these truly impactful products. What's the type of examples you've seen and things that you're really bullish on that you think in the next 2 or 3 years are going to be game changers for this space?
Well, I would build on that and just say, like, I just feel like right now one of the things that's really interesting in the health space, right, around impact, is this element of giving people more data and more feedback, right? Because I think that's what we've all lacked, right, is we kind of basically go along our way until something goes wrong, right? And that's when we start getting data. So I think there's a number of different startups in that space, like, enabling much more accessible longitudinal data for users. I think that's going to be tremendously impactful. If you look at 23andMe, going back to our core set, it is around taking that data and translating that into more useful insights for our consumers. So we have over 4 billion kind of data points across our customers, over 13 million customers, and like over 80% of them consent into research and wanting to improve health products. And so I think it's around leveraging that data and making it more effective for consumers to give them data points around how to change their lives.
And I'm interested in, Cheese is a blockchain company, and we use the blockchain for helping people license photography. I'd be interested to understand how you see new tech like blockchain and AI that everybody seems to be talking about now. How do you see blockchain and companies like 23andMe that have been impactful dovetailing? Is there a synergy between bringing your data from your body on-chain, and obviously that then has a stamp of approval and things like that? Have you got any thoughts on where that direction's heading?
Well, definitely on the machine learning side, for sure, right, has been an area that we've consistently invested in, right? If you look at everything from, so many people don't know that we actually have an arm that focuses on developing pharmaceutical drugs, right, like in terms of therapeutics, like making sure that we leverage that data to develop the most useful drugs for people. So leveraging machine learning to basically effectively find and improve the success rate of drugs. If you look at how expensive and how challenging drug making is. Like, it's often like, I think you'll see stats like less than 12% of drugs kind of make it all the way through, billions of dollars in terms of costs. The other side where we're already applying machine learning really is taking that database of information and leveraging it into insights. So we developed something called the polygenic risk scores. And what it is looking at like thousands of SNPs across your genetics or genome and relating that to kind of phenotypic outcomes or like different types of either risk conditions that might happen. And so that's another application of ML that we already do today. In terms of blockchain itself, that one I think we have less investment in today, but I would say that there are interesting applications where as we think about increasingly more data connectiveness, right, in this space, right? I think the country, I think, is on a new wave that I think is going to be important as we think about how to share that data in a private, secure, but efficient way.
You can't really flip and sell your NFT of your genome, can you? No one's going to want to buy that. So let's just kind of talk about the last few years. Obviously, COVID happened and it was all a bit crazy. Did that change the way that you guys had an outlook on the business and from a product perspective? Did you have to make any changes to what you had in the roadmap and the plan ahead of you from that global pandemic?
I would actually say some of the changes happened even before the pandemic, which was, I think, having like the world be so flush with cash and funding, I think really changed the product landscape for all of us, right? Because when you think about building uniquely impactful products, you kind of also think about what are the products that are really challenging to build and what is the competition that's going to be able to continue to thrive there. So for instance, on autonomous cars, we knew that it's very hard to build an autonomous car, an autonomous driver, right? That it requires tons of data, tons of compute, tons of complexity to get there. But I think with just the ease of accessing capital, it changed the dynamic, right, around who was going to be able to sticking around, right? And so I think that was the first change. I think when it came to COVID and the pandemic, it was really learning about, especially for businesses or startups that have more of a physical element, that was, I think, the biggest risk or challenge for us, right? So at Waymo, we were thinking a lot of our like model training, right, is derived on getting fresh data, right, and constantly being able to drive and seeing how the world changes. And so being able to think about how we navigated that in a world where everything was shutting down, I think was the biggest risk to us, in addition to just the standard one that I think all of us tackled around remote work and how would that be effective. But especially for us, that physical element, I think, made it more challenging.
And if you were looking into the future, what's your, I've got the ex-chief product officer of Waymo sat next to me. What's your outlook on how self-driving autonomous vehicles are going to happen? Like, my daughter's 7. Is she ever going to drive a car? Because this is an argument I have with people all the time. It's like, she doesn't need to learn how to drive because she never will. Do you think that in, say, 10 years' time, we will be in a place where people won't drive?
So I won't put a time frame on it because I know various founders have gone in trouble for it. But I would say that, to me, for sure, autonomy is an inevitability, right? Because we've already seen kind of continued improvements in performance in that. So for instance, Waymo in the past released data around some of the performance in Phoenix around its fully autonomous car. And so I think we will definitely see that continue to evolve, right? If you go back to it, if you think about it, like one of the top 10 causes of death is car crashes and all the issues that we see with it, and we've accepted it, right? And so I think it's for sure going to happen. It's just a matter of time.
Yeah, and I think that if you look at how people are testing things, there's obviously needs to be a lot of changes in terms of infrastructure. I was reading an article about how Amazon were testing drone deliveries, which is pretty wild, right? If in Dubai, you've got 100-story buildings, and you're going to just be sat on your balcony and a parcel arrives. I mean, how is it going to work? But I think with the autonomous side of things and from a product perspective, do you think that bringing autonomy into, say, travel, but many things, from, checking in at an airport or whatever it might be, do you think that the product landscape is going to change about how we do that? Because it's going to be kind of less hands-on and more robotic. As a product guy, what would be your thoughts on how you see changes in product if you do have autonomy come in as a wider landscape?
Yeah, I do think it opens up the aperture, right, in terms of different ways of interacting with consumers. I think when you think about whether it's autonomy, whether it's blockchain, whether it's AI, whether it's like health, I do think right now we're seeing kind of a different way of interacting with consumers, right? And so, you know, at 23andMe, I think a lot of times when we think about how we engage with our consumers, often it is, you know, it's to have like kind of that access to consumers and direct to consumer access, which is, I think, been a big part of the culture and focus for 23andMe. That is definitely different, right, than if, let's say, we're interacting with a doctor's office, right, and having, you know, that person-person interaction or physical element, right? For us to get to scale and really reach a lot of consumers, it's really around how do we interact through even our, like, notifications and emails, like through our app interactions, through, you know, the engagement, for instance, that we get on emails when we release a new report is pretty dramatic. And so understanding kind of how the consumers interact with the product, I think, is going to be important for all of us, right, in the startup community as we go forward.
Yeah, and I mean, just before we come to the end of our talk, which has gone extremely fast, so I'm sad it's over, but what would be, I would say, a couple of words of advice for entrepreneurs here in the audience that are maybe in development stage, from a product hat now? You know, obviously you've built some pretty big products. What would be your advice or some words of wisdom you could give to the guys who are maybe at MVP stage or looking to try and maybe raise funding that you've learned from your experience over the years that could maybe help some of the rock stars in the audience?
I would say maybe like two fundamental challenges I find around from the product side for startups, right, is one, figuring out what's the difference between a great idea that just needs a little more work and like a bad idea that you should give up on, right? So I think that's a challenging one. And then the other one for startups is figuring out what is an amazing kind of fit with a customer versus a big customer that's going to like drag you into custom software development, right? So to me, those, at least from my personal experience, those are two critical questions for startups. I think on the former, right, it's critical to find ways to iterate and create clear metrics like ahead of the game where you're like, hey, this is what I need to see, right, in terms of customer engagement, right, in terms of retention, and try to abstract away some other confounding factors. Let's say like the purchase flow or like, you know, your channel model, right? So find ways where you can find metrics that abstract away from that and set it ahead of time, because once you're in the throes of it, you're gonna be like, oh, well, if I just done X, Y, Z, like then I could have changed it. So I think that would be one piece of advice on that side. And then I think on the other one is just definitely, I think I've seen several startups that I've been at where it kind of got dragged into the, you know, amazing big customer, but then we ended up, you know, thinking about all of their feature requests. And so trying to really balance your customer set such that, and making sure you're abstracting away even when you have one major customer to thinking about a product that fits your overall go-to-market strategy.
Awesome. Well, we're nearly out of time, but I just want to say a big thank you for taking time to talk about it. And I think from what 23andMe, I haven't done 23andMe, so I'm a potential new customer. I think that the stories you hear and the way this is evolving and really what is changing the world that we know is phenomenal. So, you know, from yourself and the rest of the team, a massive congratulations.